All right, you guys, let's pull this together again. There's always a risk of taking a break. You don't want to come back to the activity at hand. So get something to drink and come on back to the situation here, and we'll get going again. All right, you have proven to be very, very good students. Very much on top of the game here. Very good input this evening, so greatly appreciate that. Let us continue on economic development reimagined and talk a little bit about what the impacts of that are going to be. One of the most read blogs that I did this past summer was called The Status Quo is Not an Option. And it was designed for communities maybe a little bit different than yours in terms of sometimes there's communities who just kind of want the community to stay the way it is forever. And they don't really want to have any change. And guess what? That's really not an option, right? Your choice is you're either moving forward or you're moving backwards. And in fact, it means new ways in economic development that are being precipitated. And so sometimes, this was not precipitated upon this meeting, but sometimes when the world is changing, economic development elected officials who feel very accountable for the results of such activities can become very much interested in controlling and counting and doing all these things. And sometimes when that happens, what we need to do is just kind of do a reset and say, hey, what is it? What is changing? And what are the implications that has for our program in terms of the types of things that we should be doing and that we should not be doing? And so that's what really precipitated this and the need for many communities to go back and do some shared visioning and goals and planning and all that kind of stuff. And let me make it much more tangible for you. 90%, maybe 85, if I'm generous, 85% of the economic development strategic plans today are organized around business retention expansion, business recruitment, and business startup. More than half of the strategic plans today spend more than half of their budgets on initiatives related to talent and workforce. And what do? They just jam them into these existing categories because that's the categories that their budgets have always had. And how much more impactful would it be to say, hey, are we going to do workforce and talent stuff and support that, or are we not? So that your plan better reflects what you're actually doing. And number two, so that it gives your team, your economic development team, the ability to say no to some stuff. To me, a good strategic plan is one that says, this is what we're doing and this is what we're not. And that's the other thing that I have with strategic plans is so often they just say, well, here's the waterfront and we're going to do all of it. I actually saw a job description for a guy who was hired in Missouri, and he's just started in the last couple months. I saw his job description, and it was something like 3 or 4 pages long, and he had some of it was like 2.5% of his job was this, 2.5 was that, 2.5 was that. And I just said, that's ridiculous. I said, I'm sure that all of these are wonderful things, but if you're a mile wide and a half-inch deep, any board in a year is going to look at you and say, what have you gotten done, right? You need to be half-inch wide and a mile deep and really choose the things that you're going to work on. So that's what this is about. And in order to help frame what that might be for Raymore, let me share with you how the location decision process is changing. Start at the bottom here. These two arrows, communities and companies. This is where all of it used to happen. It used to pretty much be just between those two entities. Talent was fine, it would happen, and quality of place, call the chamber at the last minute and have them do a tour. Everything's great. But something important happened, right? As talent got short, they couldn't rely on just the communities for that. They started to say, hey, we're going to go where the talent goes. Talent is like, hey, we want to go where there's quality of place. The communities are like, awesome, because we also care about quality of place. We've been trying to tell that to you forever. And now the companies, right, are reliant on this whole ecosystem, not just on, hey, we just want to go to this community because it fits all of our criteria. It's like we have to include and be a little more understanding and weight the talent and the quality of place kind of factors. Here's another way of looking at that, and I kind of described this before. But in my dad's day, I'm a second generation economic developer site selector. In my dad's day, this is how it literally was. You recruit the company. I'll see if I can do it in the right direction. Recruit the company goes this way, right? The people follow. They spend money. You recruit another company. Boom, 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 boom. But now it's not only stopped, it's gone the other direction. The company follows the talent. The talent is going there because of the quality of place. So the same three factors of community, employees, and businesses, but now the dynamic is very much significantly changed. So we did, again, a pretty exhaustive study of the labor force dynamics because we wanted to make sure that this wasn't just a fluke, number one, that it wasn't going to go back to something different in 2 years or something like that. We wanted to make sure that it was fundamentally a shift and not just a fad. And so we actually went through and did, again, I've got a whole nother data set just on this if you're interested, but we really wanted to look at what's affecting the baseline labor force and then what's affecting inflow and outflow. And these are the major issues, right? Excuse me, I've been losing my voice. I was cheering for those Chiefs so hard Sunday night because my team was in the, they were done. Okay, so baseline labor force. So how big is the population base? So it's big, right? And it's growing, but not very fast. The labor force participation rate, which is pretty much maxed out at this point, right? It had dipped with the recession and it's back up again. Skill requirements, that's a wild card. So if we have enough people, what if they're all the wrong skills? You know, what if we need basket weavers and all we have is, you know, rocket scientists or vice versa? So the skills requirement is a wild card. Automation is another wild card. I continually go to businesses, and the shift is happening, especially in rural America. 150 employees. 8 years ago, their production was X. Now they have 175 employees, and their production is 2X because of automation. And right? Automation, they don't call in sick, they don't take vacation, they work 24 hours a day, blah, 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 blah. So, and it's not just manufacturing, right? We all know that. Actually the number one industry for automation, or automatability, I think it's called, is accommodations and food service. Y'all read the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. I read them both just for fun to keep myself sane. So this weekend they had a couple articles, right? They had McDonald's, where already if you go through the drive-thru of McDonald's, you're getting someone in like Arizona who's taking your order. It's not somebody in the little back of the hut with no windows. It's literally when you call it, when you do the drive-thru. But now they're actually taking pictures of your license plate, and they'll say, well, last time you ordered fries with that. Would you like fries with that this time? And we know, right, because some of the restaurants have the tablets, and do you know that people are more likely to order dessert when they're not ordering it from a person because they don't feel the guilt or whatever? They're just like, yeah, give me a dessert, give me that, give me that. Or maybe they think it's a pinball machine, I'm not sure. But anyways, automation has a huge impact, and it's not just on manufacturing. Back office jobs are going to be severely impacted. In fact, we have, what we do now with our target industry analyses is we look at the occupational obsolescence. How about that one? So in a lot of industries, and I'm going to pick on finance, insurance, and real estate, which we call FIRE, there's these middle management jobs that are being automated, right? So appraising a house, used to have the person driving around and looking at it. Boom, now you can have that with drones and with computer modeling to figure out how much that house is worth. So there's huge impacts, hollowing out jobs in all kinds of different sectors. And so being resilient to that, in my mind, back to your point about these higher wage jobs that are also maybe automation resilient, would be a factor that I would look at. You going to approve that? Yeah. Yeah. Who should you be recruiting? That's awesome. So there's something like 10,000 baby boomers a day that are retiring. And if you go to some of your existing businesses and ask them what % of your labor force is retiring in the next 5 years, I've heard 30%, 20%, 25%. amazing numbers, right? So what are we going to do? So they're going to automate, they're going to have the young people, all this kind of stuff. Who should you be recruiting, right? Definitely younger people, and they're not as loyal, and that sounds bad. They're interested. They don't have as long of a tenure at each job. How about that? Is that a way of saying that? They want to learn, all of these different kind of dynamics in the workforce. Maybe that's what Raymore is known for, is being the guys who figure that out and decide what kind of workforce they can hire. I can tell you employee engagement is going to be super important, right? How are you going to keep those employees, keep them engaged, keep them learning? Mobility, working from home, working on all of these different things are impacting it. Other influencers, okay. The birth rate, it's still going up, but not as quickly as it had been. Immigration is in a little bit of a flux, you might say, but generally going down. Retirements are going up, and then migrations, again, not that big of an element in the whole scheme of things, but certainly an impact as well. So all of these things are kind of leading to boom, 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 and the changing world of economic development. So some of the takeaways that we had from doing this analysis is that talent shortage is here to stay. It's not just a fad, it's an actual trend. Think about this. We think about, I'm going to beat this in your head, right? Business retention expansion, business recruitment, business startup. The parallel for talent is talent retention and development, talent recruitment, talent automation. So you start thinking about the talent world in that sphere, and you say, just like in business retention, talent retention is number one. So when communities wake up and they go, we've got 500 open jobs in a community of 6,000 people, which believe me, I've heard, their inclination is we're going to build a website or we're going to put up billboards on the highway and direct them here, and certainly they'll come. That's not going to work, right? Number one. But number two, their first move should be, we are going to make sure that we help our employees keep the employees that they have. The next thing we're going to do is see if there's opportunities to move those employees up into some of these other positions, and then we're going to fill in the gaps in terms of recruitment, right? So again, it's like the gut reaction is we're going to get people here because this is an awesome place to live, work, and play. But you've got to be thinking about that whole scheme of retention and development and then recruitment. The most likely wild cards for providing a step change in the U.S. labor force, I already mentioned this, are automation and the skills gap. Either one could go either way, positive or negative. I'm starting to feel that automation is going to have a negative impact, especially on rural, but again, I'm only being recorded, so no big deal. Rebounding from a decline in productivity. So we have a decline in productivity per worker. And it's really fascinating if you read up on this. It's the first time that there's a disconnect between the number of workers and the productivity. Every other time there's been huge gains in automation, like think Henry Ford and stuff like that, you could see that the people would easily move into higher jobs and everything would be good. But now it's a little bit more muddy. You're still getting a main welder overseeing the welding machine that took 4 people's jobs, but it's less clear on how those other people are being reapportioned. So it's not as linear as that connection used to be, and so productivity is a big concern these days. And it is very, very likely that employees are going to continue to reinvest in reskilling of people. Here's a fascinating trend. One of the things that we look at when we do target industry analysis is disruptions, because we're looking for obsolescence. And one of the trends we're seeing in call centers is that companies who used to kind of outsource call centers, right? It's not our core business. Those people can do it. It's a contract basis. Do you know what I'm talking about? Okay. So they're saying, we are now going to bring that in-house again, because that can be our farm team. That can be our farm league, and we can figure out from those call center people who fits in our culture and who we might want to bring in full-time to our staff. That has huge implications now on you guys, let's pretend, for call centers. So now let's pretend a call center wants to locate here. Let's just pretend. You could say, great, are you a contract call center or are you part of the mothership? Because if you're part of the mothership, that might be much more interesting to us, even if it's still $12 an hour with benefits, right? Because you're going to be more strategically tied into their company rather than, oh, they just got these jobs in their contract work and, you know, they're going to be spitting them out and they're just going to be, these poor people are going to be recycled, right? So it starts to make you think a little bit differently about these projects that come in. You can't necessarily just judge them all by the cover. You got to kind of dig in there a little bit and see if it's going to fit with your values and the type of talent trajectory that you're going to have here. It goes back to the schools. And school guy and I, we've never met, right? I'm just talking about schools because schools, I have realized, are super important. Okay, I mentioned this before, so one of the other big implications is that as we go through the funnel of doom here, the site selection process, the availability of talent and the barriers to talent are coming up earlier in the process. So again, as you're getting those RFIs, they're much more likely to be asking about not only brew pubs and things to do, but what about talent, what about housing, those kinds of things. Because we know from experience that those are the barriers. So you could even extend an offer to somebody and they might accept it and then they have to turn it down because they can't find housing. Those kinds of things happening. Okay, so what are the impacts of this? And again, you've seen this and I went through that. Number one, there's a new 3 legs of the stool of economic development. Here we have business retention, expansion, business recruitment, business startup. That used to be kind of everything that was economic development. Now we still got to do all that. That's just one leg of the stool. But now we also have to deal with talent, retention, development, and recruitment, and with placemaking. Now what I often say is business development is often led by the regional, the utilities, estate groups, but you can have a strong presence to support that. Business retention expansion should be led locally, obviously. On the talent side, you're probably going to be primarily working in regional groups like you are and supporting your existing employers and their employee engagement and retention, those kinds of things. And then for placemaking, that typically falls to the cities, which in your case is you. But that could be everything from this building, frankly, a wonderful example of it, to a myriad of other potential things that make your city a wonderful place to live. Implication number 2, got to be aligned. You guys are already aligned, it seems like. But this is the greatest opportunity for most communities, is to get better alignment around what your goals are, what your plans are, what your priorities are, what you want the future of your community to be, and to work together toward it, to be rowing all in the same direction. It takes a huge amount of effort to get to this state and to keep this state, so I hope that you continue to take advantage of it while you appear to be in it. It's good. Very, very critical factor. Number 3, talent development and business development should both be considered as areas to include in your plan and programs. And so what I'm saying by that is, if you're going to spend money on talent stuff, put it under talent in your plan. Don't just jam it under business development, because those are the categories you've always had. Really be intentional about what it is that you're doing and why as you support those programs. We have, by chance, a talent strategy database. So about 3 years ago now, I wrote a book called The Talent Toolbox for Economic Developers, because I wanted to see if there was a silver bullet for this little situation that I could see coming down the track. So the answer is no, there's not. But there's a process to it, right? It's like anything, identify what the core issue is, figure out what your alternatives are, and what fits with your assets and your goals. That's what makes you different than Belton and Lee Summit and everywhere else. Your assets are different, your goals are different. Figure out what programs fit and then move forward with those. And to help facilitate that, we created a database, and we've got over 300 different talent strategies now that are in place here in the United States, and they include some of those housing examples that I mentioned earlier of creative, innovative, municipality-driven housing situations, but they also are things about talent retention, recruitment, and talent development as well. Okay. So again, it helps provide a breadth of things. Otherwise, we get caught up in just apprenticeships for everybody or just whatever it is for everybody. Okay. Implication number 4, EDOs, economic development groups, have a stake in placemaking and place managing, but it may be the convener rather than the doer. Accept your community, so you're probably going to be very involved in some of the doing pieces. This is a graphic by the Project for Public Spaces. Some of the planner types know of this group. But it's a nice wheel that shows the breadth of different placemaking types of activities. And what I would say with this is your goal is not to color in everything. Your goal is to pick maybe 20% of these things and say, this is what we want to be known for, what we are known for in Raymore. This is what we're going to focus on. But there's a whole panoply of things up there, as you can see. Okay, and then key success factors are changing a little bit. So we talked about readiness, differentiation, and alignment, and how important those are. The typical definition of them was somewhat refined and defined, and now they're becoming broader. So readiness is not just site readiness anymore, it's talent readiness, entrepreneurship readiness, community readiness, organizational development. Being in differentiation isn't just about business anymore, it's about talent. So increasingly, the economic development websites have one channel for talent and one channel for businesses, because we're trying to recruit both at the same time. Alignment and stakeholder engagement is not just the ED universe, but also players who touch on talent. Much more important to be part of the tent these days. And then the performance metrics, again, I alluded at these from the very beginning, but moving from just investment in jobs to also include economic mobility and economic equity. You guys hanging in there? We'll go through these. Okay, let's talk about what the impact might be on economic development marketing. So I'm remiss to share this with you because it's the secret of economic development marketing consulting, but marketing is just three things. It's in this order: figuring out who your market is, right? Who your audience is, what the message is, what they care about, how you're going to reach them. And sometimes I make an alliteration out of it: markets, messages, and media. That's all a marketing plan is. When you think about how the world of economic development is changing, it's impacting all three of those elements. So it's not just like, oh, we have a new audience, but we're going to have the same message in the same media. It's like, oh, we have a new audience, and they have different messaging, and we have to reach them in different ways. So it really makes the process much more difficult. So the audience is expanded from primarily businesses to also individuals. What's important to each audience changes, because you as an individual cares about a little bit different things than what a business would care about, and how to reach the audience has changed, right? So the traditional methods was very controlled and top-down, and now it's very network-based. Everyone talks to everybody. Okay. And so what that means is that what we used to be able to focus on here for economic development marketing was, hey, all we got to do is talk about operating costs, operating conditions, and quality of life to site selectors and locations, and we're good. Now we have kind of a broader scope of what marketing can be, what it can entail, to not only include that, but again, site selectors, companies want to know more about the place, right? The availability of talent and some of the barriers. And then on the talent side, there's a lot of things that they want to understand about the communities, about the employers, those kinds of things. So we have kind of a broader focus now as far as economic development marketing goes. And so what does that mean? It means that a lot of places, this is Greater New Orleans, have parallel kind of communication strategies, one for businesses and one for individuals. It means that you need different but not inconsistent branding and key messages, because again, people care about things in different ways. It means that consistency in branding is key. And what I mean by this is, like, I travel a lot, right? I'm on the road quite a bit. And I'm really always interested in where I'm going to eat, because that's really important. And so I go to a community, and now you don't have to just eat at the places by the highway, right? Because now you can get information on the place that's in town a half a mile or a mile, those kinds of things. So what I do is I look up, like, let's say a Subway or a McDonald's. And if a Subway is like a 4.2, that's now my bar, right? And so if I'm going to go at least for a 4.3 in that community. You guys aren't laughing. But it's the availability of information, right, from all these different sources that you can't really control. The Yelp reviews and the Google reviews and all those kinds of things, they're just out there. You can't, like in the old days, the chamber would print off 1,000 brochures and give them to you, and you would send out the packet, and that's our view of your community. But now we can go online, we can look at your newspapers, we can look at your editorials, we can look at your YouTube channel, we can probably look at your minutes on the internet, we can find out a lot of information about your place before we even show up, right? So you can't just, I call it, you can't just put lipstick on a pig anymore. You have to actually be who you are. And you have to be able to communicate it and to get the word out there. That's what all that means. Okay. Technology makes your job easier and it makes it harder in terms of marketing. Number one, strategy matters more than ever, right? So years ago, 15 years ago, when we were building economic development websites, 60% of the website cost was the programming, because everything was custom programmed. So now a website is not only cheaper, but the technology portion of it is much, much less, because there's toolboxes now that people can do a lot of that themselves. So the technology becomes commoditized, and what differentiates you is the strategy and the messaging and the positioning piece of really being smart about how you position your community. Data is a means to an end and not the end in and of itself. And so we see communities, first of all, I mean, in the old days it would be they were just talking about themselves. The middle is like, okay, now we got infographics and we're going to talk about our community. Now the way to differentiate yourself is to have the infographics, but to tell a story with them. Talk about why Raymore is what it is and how your brand all connects with it. People want that story. They want that authenticity. And then it's about your brand. And what your brand is more than your logo. What your brand is you know, what people say about you when you're not listening. It can be, you know, the answer to that question, why are you a great place to live, work, and play? It's all of that stuff communicated repeatedly. Any questions? You've been such good students tonight. We covered a lot of ground. We got a question, so let's bring a microphone to the second row here. One of the planning and zoning checkered shirt men. Council. Previous planning and zoning, okay. He's got the wrong shirt. He did got the right uniform.
My question is, would you say that the number one thing that has changed from then to now is basically the internet and the availability of information? If you think about 22 years ago, a high school graduate might know a handful of colleges, whereas now there are hundreds that they can find out about. Same thing with cities and everything else, like you were saying with the food. People don't have to just stay in a town that they were born in because they have more information to say, hey, I could go somewhere else. And I think a lot of it is just people are inherently wanting to relax and be lazy at the end of the day. And so if it's hard to find out stuff, they're not going to go have any information on it. But do you think that's, because I keep seeing that in your presentation, all the thens and nows, and it kind of goes back about 20 years.
I think about this picture right here. So it used to be, you know, the media controlled the media, and now it's like you've got blogs and websites and opinion. I mean, everyone's just learning from everybody. And there's some downsides to it too, right? Because now we're learning that they're actually feeding us stuff they think that reinforces our current beliefs, the algorithms. And so it's like we feel like we have access to more information, and yet maybe we don't. So I think I'd be interested in what other people think, but I think that the distribution, I don't know how to say it, the disaggregation of information is certainly a piece of it. And technologies now are having impacts on how businesses are run and what occupations are. So it's the digitization of a lot of things, I think, beyond just the internet. Yeah, good point. Yeah. 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 That's an awesome question. I'm going to repeat it because I'm not sure that the mic picked it up. But it was basically, I'm not going to say should we, but how should we be rethinking retail given that Amazon is changing, Amazon and other .coms are changing how we buy stuff today. So the presentations that I've seen on this in my experience have been that we're still buying more stuff. So it's not like we're not buying as much stuff. And in fact, we continue to buy more than you would even imagine we could each buy, right? So the consumer purchases continues to grow. How we're getting it is different. And the implications that has on real estate are tremendous. And so we see it first with malls being repurposed and repositioned, right? We see it with smaller retails going out of business. So it's just a different use of the real estate, but we still need real estate to do retail. So I would say, yes, you should be looking at retail differently. What kinds of retail are you going to, quote, forever need brick and mortar, and which ones are you not? And how might you support some of these so that you can get the sales tax for some of that stuff? The rest of my team is heading to the East Coast tomorrow to spend time in a community that is the #2 retail sales tax collector in this particular county, in this particular state. And one of the key things we're looking at is redevelopment of retail, because we see it as one of the biggest threats for their continued success because of Amazon's and all that. We're actually looking at repositioning their mall, so think of a high-density metro area, repositioning their mall as a distribution center for that retail, because that same-day delivery is becoming more important. The malls are where? They're in in the middle of urban areas with good interstate access. And so those are the kinds of things that are happening to those spaces. So very, very critical to be thinking about, even the strip here as we came in on 58, it's like, wow, there's a lot of retail here. And a lot of it's food, and I think that's going to be one of the last things to be delivered overnight, I hope. But lots of retail here, yeah. Any other questions or thoughts? Let's get the microphone. We'll do it. Okay.
You used a phrase that was unfamiliar to me that was interesting. I didn't know if you could expand on. With reference to millennials, you said sharing economy.
Oh yeah, the sharing economy in reference to millennials. What does that mean? So it means like that you don't have to buy your own car. You can just use Lyft. You don't have to. You can share your living space with other people when you're there or not. You can rent it out as an Airbnb, and so on and so on and so on. And so every time you hear someone say it's the Uber of blank, that means sharing economy. And that has implications, right, for how we shape our communities, how we shape the workforce, all those kinds of things. In part it does, yeah. So I was at a new gym yesterday, and I was excited because I had cable and I could like watch football, so I was really excited by this. And I turned on the TV, and you can't actually watch anything that's happening live. It's like you could sign in with your Netflix and your YouTube, and I mean, it was just like, where do you find the actual channels that you remember the old days when you turned on the TV and you had channels and you could go to a certain channel and expect to watch football? I couldn't figure it out. I don't think they can do it. And so it's like millennials, I'm going to blame it on them. Well, we have some in the room. It's like they can choose what they watch and when, and I'm sure they're paying more than we ever did in cable to do it. Did I answer your question, or am I just ranting about football? Okay, yeah.
It's actually the opposite. You see millennials going to that because it's cheaper than cable, and cable wants to package everything.
Yeah.
And millennials want to feel as though they have the freedom to actually.
They have control, yeah.
It's kind of, I think, the outcome of having 5,000 channels. Because I remember when I was a kid, I was a remote control. You know, my dad would go change the channel, and I'd go change it. And then we got to the point where literally I can scroll through my cable channels and go, I have no idea what I want to watch, and there's too much to pick from.
Or there's 5,000 channels and there's nothing I actually want to watch.
Right. And so,
How many of us have faced that, right?
so you're getting the Uber of cable or Uber of TV with like Hulu and things like that, which will give you basically, you pick the one that has the shows you like.
Right.
And then you just have to pay for that instead of for all this stuff I don't need.
Yeah, so there we have it. Good, any other questions? We have one here.
Yeah, you mentioned diversity in your expert opinion. What does that entail? Unless we recruit robot factories, build robots for the next 100 years, we need to have something that's going to span longevity. So, in what you
So what are some ways that we could get at
second
economic
question too.
diversity? Yeah.
Are you really a Chiefs fan, or do you just hate the Vikings?
Yes, yes, yes. So what is economic diversity, right? I think we can think about it in a number of different dimensions. So we can think about it in terms of target industries. So maybe if we're into, I don't know what you guys are into here, but tier 2 or tier 3 automotive might be a target industry. Back office operations might be a target industry. Retail might be a target industry, so forth. You can think about it in terms of industry sectors, so manufacturing, distribution, office, and transportation. You could think about it in terms of established companies and startup companies. You could think about, so you see where I'm going? So you can think about it in a lot of different directions. You can think about it in consumer packaged goods companies and industrial. Just typically, you don't want too much of anything. Let's say not more than 20% of your economy being something. And sometimes it's government or social services. And you probably also don't want industries that are cyclical to co-cyclical. You want counter-cyclical, right? If something's going up, something else is going down, so that you don't feel too much of the economic cycles. But just something to look at if you're going to shape your future and think about, what kinds of jobs and occupations you want, what kind of industries you want, how that matches up with your available sites and buildings and housing and all that, could really create some nice diversification that way. Anything else? All right, well, Jim, my host, has this presentation, and if you're interested, he can arrange to get you a PDF of it. I have some cards in the back if you're interested in that. If you like this kind of stuff, certainly follow the blog, which is here. It's free. You can skulk around on the website and just read the blog. You don't have to sign up if you don't want to. But other than that, I would like to thank the mayor and the Jims for having me. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Janet. Thank you very much. Very interesting. And thank you all for being here tonight. Thanks for being our guinea pig. We actually, this is the first time we're broadcasting from this facility. It's our backup for continuity of government purposes. It's our backup facility for that. So we are exercising that tonight. And I think it went well, didn't it? The meeting went very well. I'm hoping that the broadcast went very well as well. So thank you all for being here tonight. Have a pleasant rest of your evening.